everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. It's Tuesday, which means it's an MLS edition of the Total Soccer Show. My name is Taylor Rockwell. Here to talk with me about a bunch of different things is the man himself. It's Mr. New England Rev Joe Lucian. It's Joe Lowry. Joe, a lovely, lovely title for you today to start this episode.
That is my government name, New England Rev Joe Lucian. Don't fact check that. That's the truth, and you're going to have to just trust me, bro.
I appreciate that. And joining the crew on theme is Jeff Twerking Toklamati Reuter. Jeff, thank you so much for being here as well, my friend.
Yeah, and again, look, I disagree with the fine. I do. I think it was harsh, especially at a time when we need joy and fun more than ever, but I'll pay it. It's okay, and I'll do it again if I have to, if provoked. You bet.
That fine was issued before the punishment to Luis Suarez, right? They
Correct.
had to get the twerking one out of the way before they could focus on Suarez?
Priorities, yeah. They were too distracted. They had to watch the footage and say, okay, fine, now put this away and let's go back and watch fighting. Because as we talked about to start that episode, if you watch the fight for too long, you're too quiet and you're brooding and you're in all these sorts of that was the wrong decision. But twerking, there's only a few of us who are like, I would have done that too. And I am team twerk. So, like, do it.
When does that become an HR violation in MLS HQ offices when someone's watching the twerking celebration too many times? Like,
Yeah.
When do you get a talking to, do you think?
We don't
have
a
any
limit
guarantees
somewhere.
this.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think if you're exiting the office bathroom and then you twerk immediately in the hallway, I think usually the HR will pull you aside.
Boy, I'm glad I led us down this road. We are going to talk about Charlotte. We're going to talk a little bit about Miami. We're going to talk about some of the teams that have been eliminated from playoff contention. But first, Joe, it's time to talk Caleb Porter and the New England Rev Joe Lucian. They have parted ways with 4 games remaining in Porter's second season in charge. They're 11th on the table, 10 points out of a playoff spot. Are you surprised that this is the way it's gone?
Nope, not at all. Really, Caleb Porter has such a fascinating career, right? I mean, he's a fascinating character for all sorts of reasons. He has coached, and this came from Alex Abnos. He's coached 11 seasons, counting this one, Caleb Porter. His teams have missed the playoffs 7 times, counting this season. He's also one of the only coaches in MLS history to win MLS Cups with multiple different teams. He has existed at both ends of the coaching spectrum, and it's just so happened that the more frequent end that he's visited is the one that's popped up in New England. They were 14th in the East last season. They allowed 74 goals in 34 games. That was one of the all-time bad defensive records, eclipsed by the San Jose Earthquakes last season, so we didn't talk about it so much. But they were truly terrible last year. And Caleb Porter, to his credit, knew they were terrible. In the summer transfer window, they made a ton of moves. In the offseason, they made a ton of moves, to the point where they had overhauled more of their squad based off of total minutes played than any other team in MLS from the end of last season to the start of this new season, the one we're in now. Caleb Porter then comes out and makes the expectation for his team very clear over the offseason. He says, quote, "We had good players here," talking about when he arrives ahead of the 24 season. "They just didn't happen to be the right players." Then he adds later, "Now we have the right players. This is my team. These are my players. I've picked them, and I'm confident in the blueprint that I have." That's a fine quote to make, so long as you're okay to live with the repercussions of failure, right? And that's what this year has been for the Revs. It has been a year filled with failure. And Caleb Porter, the coach, has not elevated this product. Caleb Porter, it sounds like, from Porter, and I don't know all the intricacies of the dynamic between him and Chief Soccer Officer Kurt Anolfo, but it sounds like Porter, the player picker, right, like the recruiter, the talent identifier, has also let down Caleb Porter, the coach, and vice versa. It's been just a whole mess of fail this year for the Revs. They're not a good team. They don't have a clear identity on the field. Their player acquisitions have not, on balance, been good enough. And the result of all of that is in a very good Eastern Conference, you are all but eliminated from playoff contention, and they will not make the playoffs for 2 years in a row under Porter.
Jeff, as Joe said, this was a team that made a ton of moves in the offseason that Porter said was his team and was, theoretically going to an MLS Cup again. Was the writing on the wall? Could we see this? Did you see this ahead of time, or did you feel like some of the moves did make sense? This was going to be a stronger team, and then they just fell flat.
Yeah, I mean, I liked some of their business quite a bit. I know that this offseason I really liked them being opportunistic to get Leo Campana away from Inter Miami, and that I think was the sort of lead striker that he was hoping, to his point. It's a funny quote because, like, as Joe shares, it's like, I had good players, not the right players, now I have the right players. He never specified they were good, which... I found his next excuse. But, like, you look at Campana, and Campana missed most of March and then struggled to find a scoring form again until about July, right around the League's Cup break after the Club World Cup little mini pause. And so you don't have your lead striker. And what you saw is Porter maybe scrambling, maybe just saying like, look, the chips have to fall where they may. I got the players, and this is all I can really do about it. You look at them stylistically. They were outshot throughout his tenure 15 to 12 per game on average. They kept about 51% of the ball, so they were trying to just generally be competitive in the possession balance, but not necessarily, I would argue, not driven wisely to use the possession. When you look at it, they were way too cross-reliant. And I think often when we think about a cross-reliant team, it's a desperate team, right? Because right now in possession, there's so many other clever ways that you can go about generating chances. But I think especially defensively over the last decade, systems have gotten so much better curated and better drilled, where crosses are more volatile for the crossing team than for the team trying to defend them away. I think right now teams have pretty much found how to do the air defense. So when you look at a team that crosses for every, I think it's 33 passes they attempt, which is the second most frequent rate. Most MLS teams will play over 41 passes before they try a cross, and they were doing it about 32 passes per cross. They weren't even accurate. They were the 5th worst crossing team in terms of accuracy. So it was just leaning into something that wasn't working over and over again. Despite having Carlos Heel, they only had the 27th most big chances per game. And big chances are just simply clear-cut scoring chances. And if you're not finding those ways to do that, it doesn't really matter who your players are, right? Because you're not setting them up to succeed.
So with all that said, question for you both, and then we'll move to New England as an organization. Does Caleb Porter get another MLS job?
Oh, great question. I knew this was coming. I will say yes, because there are even more desperate teams in New England. And it is, as it is in every league in the world, basically the same names that get recycled around. But I think we are talking about a Montreal, DC United level job. I think like you have to go down on the pecking order, right? From New England, from this failure for Caleb Porter. This was his rebound from failure at the end of his time in Columbus, after there'd been success in Columbus. A little bit of a break, comes back in, moves down a rung, sort of in my estimation of real serious MLS organizations. Jeff, for me, I think the answer I hedge towards yes, and I think it has to be moving down the ladder.
The only way I could see no is that I think because expansion has stopped, at least for now, I think that teams are more willing to make up their mind about existing coaches and not feel like they need to bring in the experienced hand to the same degree. There will be those teams that need it, right? Like if Toronto had, like after the John Herdman era, decided they wanted someone who could coach, so they brought in someone who could coach and someone who has had success in Major League Soccer, and so Robin Fraser makes sense there. But Robin Fraser didn't have the same sort of like bugaboo factor about him that I think Caleb Porter does now, because I think you have a mix of players not really playing terribly hard. The thing that's weird about this, and I don't think we really spent time talking about this, is at one point this season, the Revs were unbeaten in 9. And during that stretch, which like completely broke my brain, they were like, you would watch them play, and they weren't necessarily like the best drilled team doing clever things. It wasn't like Carlos Heel in his MVP bag, right? It was mentality. It was Matt Polster throwing himself in front of every shot that was taken from beyond the box to prevent it. But if you look over time, they had the 5th most points dropped per lead this year. They dropped 1.2 points per time they were leading, which is not a good way to get results in Major League Soccer. They also were one of the worst teams at like getting ball recoveries, loose balls, and just turning 50-50s into possession. And so at that point, that just kind of shows like the proactive mentality maybe just wasn't there. And so I wonder, like, players seem burned out on him. Fan bases certainly have gotten burned out on him. He misses the playoffs more often than he succeeds in them. And I think that there are just safer propositions that you would look at and say, like, why wouldn't you go for a Jim Curtin or a Peter Vermees among the more recently dismissed MLS head coaches rather than Caleb Porter?
All right. So people can theoretically change, and Caleb Porter could sort of learn new things about himself, change up his style, add new skill sets, and maybe succeed in another job. But knowing what we know about him, I've asked you, will he? Now I'll ask you both, should Caleb Porter get another job in Major League Soccer? Joe?
No. I'll say no. Let me frame it this way. If I was an expansion team, let's say there's one popping down to Casa Grande, Arizona, and I'm going to start a new expansion team, I would not choose to hire Caleb Porter for that job. Nor do I think that most teams in MLS would choose to do that. I don't think Caleb Porter, with his pedigree at this stage and with how things have ended for him now, I don't think that would be a go-to for me.
Jeff?
And I think I would agree, because the more likely would be he gets an assistant post, which is something that we've seen with Pablo Mastroeni when he came back after Colorado. That was kind of the path. He took Dom Kinnear with Cincinnati. I just don't know if that would be as fulfilling for someone who has, had the heights he has. I think I could see him going back to college and doing very well with another program. But I just wonder, especially with MLS teams looking for coaches from abroad more than they ever have once again, I just think that it's kind of tough to see where he would win in many criterias that are set of like, this is what we're looking for. The one thing I guess I could say is that he had success getting Columbus pretty quickly, and then it fell apart. But if you're looking for someone who can do that sort of smash and grab, maybe like you expect it to be challenging for the Shield, you're not going to do it. You fire your coach 10 games in and you need to bring in just like a tournament manager. Maybe there's still a little juice for him to kind of jolt the battery, but I'm not sure. I'm really not.
This is a question for you two. I want to see if you guys can come to consensus. Because it seems like the consensus I saw with New England Revs fans on Reddit was that Porter is a problem, not the problem, and that New England itself has some issues that they need to figure out as an organization. So if you agree with that premise, as a franchise in terms of ambition, where are New England on a scale of 1 to 10 if 1 is DC United and 10 is Miami, with the moves they've made, maybe not necessarily where they are in the standings, but with their sort of win-now mentality? If that's your scale, where are you all putting the Revs?
I have a number, Jeff, in my mind. You go.
Should I say 3, 2, 1, and then you guys can do it?
Yeah.
Oh, that'll be magical, so no one can hear us.
2.
That's good.
1.
5.
2.
Ooh, all right,
okay.
Jeff, explain.
There we go. I think that it's not just ambition, it's ambition to scale. And I think that if you look at how most MLS teams operate, the Revs are still going to be mentioned among the first 4 unambitious teams, right? Like when you think of like, it's something that's been so missing in the landscape. Grant Wall has been missing from the landscape, but he had his series of the ambition rankings that I think were always really useful. And it's kind of a way that I've still trained myself to think about these organizations, where there's the sporting side, there's the facilities, there's the academy, and then there's just kind of like a vibe that comes off. And you look at the Revs and like, they're still playing in Foxborough. They're still, operating with Bruce's. Kurt Analfo was brought in by Bruce Arena and has kind of elevated himself into a very leading sporting role. But like, there's also just a lot of holdover. That is an organization that likes stability, and I think that sometimes you say that there isn't enough of that, and some coaches and sporting directors should get more time to actually see out their project before you just kind of snap the fingers and you make a mistake like St. Louis has made over and over again since Bradley Carnell left. But I think that when there are obvious signs that there's infrastructure issues in terms of like your scouting staff, your data analytics, your medical team, your field surface, all of these sorts of things, it's going to be very difficult for any coach, short of Bruce Arena himself, to overcome some of those obstacles.
Yeah, I'm a little warmer, clearly from my number, not dramatically so, but I'm a little warmer on the Revs, mostly because I think there are some good bones here, and maybe they have one of the most important bones that is a real standout. Maybe it's the femur for them. I don't know. So pick some big important bone.
That's
which
the
is
big
their
important bone.
It's one of them for sure. It's one of the bones, and it's a big bone. They have become one of the premier MLS teams when it comes to developing talent. So the obvious one right now, after players they've already sold, see Tejan Buchanan, think about Esmir Baraktarovic. The gem of that whole bunch right now is Peyton Miller, who I think is the best player of that whole bunch. He is really good. He is a well above average MLS left back now. And he is, I think, only recently not a child or about to not be a child.
Right.
Correct. He's awesome. And the Revs, you talk to people that know the youth landscape in the U.S. better than me. They are one of the first teams always mentioned in terms of their academy setup's really good. They're churning through players. And what that does is not just generate money for you to go out and spend on transfer fees. It also generates you useful low salary cap players in the short term with someone like Peyton Miller who won't be around forever. And it also, when they can sell those players, helps them refresh the allocation money coffers. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Leo Campana deal for the most expensive, the highest amount of allocation money in MLS history, comes down fairly close after the Revs had sold Baraktarovic to PSV. And they could refresh, as per the MLS roster rules, their allocation money coffers, effectively. So that helps you. And the Revs can do that kind of stuff. The Revs have also proven that they will spend money. If we're talking about ambition, and Taylor and I talked about this briefly before we started recording, spending and success in MLS, not correlated. If you can go out there and spend money on good players, though, you should do it. And the Revs have shown a willingness to spend money. They've recently just added that U22 Israeli striker, Dor Turgeman, who's gotten a few minutes with the national team, was wanted by some kind of Europa League level clubs over in Europe as well. He's come into this group, and I think there could be something there. There is some talent here. Like there's something here. Like there are fine pieces in this roster They just need more. They have a lot of work to do now looking forward. And if we're talking about their expectations for next season, I wouldn't bet on them being a playoff team next season. I think it's going to take a while before even we see them as sort of a 5 on this scale that Taylor's laid out for us. They need a new coach. Maybe they need a new CSO where Curtin Alfo's just sort of fallen upward into that role. They need an identifiable approach on the field. Jeff, I think you laid out the style or lack thereof really well earlier.
Yeah, I was going to say style is too kind of word.
Yeah. It is, right? They've been kind of a mushy team in basically every way, and you can get away in MLS as being a mushy team if you have game changers. And their game changer is past his prime Carles Heel in the second worst season of his career, and the worst season of his career was last year. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to do for New England.
2 questions. How much of the perception of that lack of ambition do you think is rooted in the stadium situation?
A lot.
Because for me, if you're playing in a smaller soccer-specific stadium, like right on the outskirts of Boston or in Boston, I feel like that's going to go a long way towards generating some enthusiasm and some excitement versus a half-empty stadium in the Boston suburbs being generous.
Yeah, and you can't, demand the same sort of prominence that the Patriots get. You can't just assume that you're going to have the same sort of broader New England of it if you haven't done that sort of outreach. And I think that both teams feel like Boston products much more than New England products, right? But that does matter if you're also not engaging with Boston. And I think that's a big part of it as well, is just the energy hasn't been there in the same way. Certainly when you compare it to the heydays of Twellman and then you move on to certainly even the 2014 version, which I think is maybe I know that there was the supporter shield and the point record team, but that was lost to COVID era, right? So we didn't get to appreciate it in the same way. That 2014 team where Jermaine Jones joins mid-season, there was just some sort of different energy about the Revs too.
Super excited to join
more than Chicago. Illinois tattoo was just a happenstance, no relation to that whatsoever. Cool. But blind draws aside, I think it's been very difficult, and I don't think that they've done really well. Right, exactly. Yeah. Wow, I found this envelope that happened to say New England. Sorry, buddy. I don't know where we put the Chicago one.
Yeah.
Right.
Didn't he say that recently?
He said a lot of things recently. Yeah.
That's true. All right.
Yeah.
One more question for you all for New England. I'm all about scales, I guess, today. 0% to 100%, Joe. 100% means it's definitely happening. Jim Curtin is the next manager?
Total guess, obviously, no information here. I'll say 12%. Jim Curtin, and then I want to hear Jeff's number. But Jim Curtin is consensus. You sort of talk to people around MLS. He is the number one coaching candidate available. I think that's fascinating because we've talked about this before, Taylor. Jim Curtin's success in Philly came once Ernst Tanner had got there. And I do respect Jim Curtin surviving in Philly as long as he did. And by all accounts, he is an extremely nice guy who has been an effective locker room leader, and he was flexible in his tactical approach. And I think he deserves credit for all those things. But you hire Jim Curtin, it sounds like from the rumblings out there that Jim Curtin doesn't just want to be coach. He wants the Greg Berhalter deal, where he wants to be coach and CSO. And you can build out the front office. It doesn't have to be a Bruce Arena, Peter Vermees, full, I'm doing every single thing all the time sort of thing. But you hire Jim Curtin, it probably means you're giving him a lot of power, which, again, could be just fine. But if you do that, it feels like there's an awful lot of questions. How is that team even going to play? How does Jim Curtin want to play? I don't know. I don't know Jim Curtin well enough to have a good answer to that question. I'm sure many people do. Go Taylor.
I'm just now picturing, in a scene from Goodfellas, Kurt Arnolfo's interviewing Jim Curtin. They're walking down the stairs into someone's basement, and he's just like, so, you want to be the head coach? I want to be the head coach and the chief soccer officer. But that's my job. And then the door opens, and we fade to black.
I think that's what would maybe have to happen if this were to happen, Taylor. So anyway, I went off on my Jim Curtin thing because I think it's interesting. But I think the odds are low. And I'll say 12. Not zero, definitely. Tom reported this already. The Revs have reached out to Jim Curtin about this job. He's in the mix. Where that lands, though, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not going to go much higher than 12. I'll say 30. I just think that I should have priced it right with 13. I need to watch more Price is Right. Then
you got to go under. Actually, Price is Right rules is you would go under. You would just say $1.
Yeah, 1%, Drew. No, I think it's a viable shot. Don't get me wrong, but Tom threw in verbiage that it was, for the right project. And I do think that, to your point, Joe, plays well with others is something that actually is a strength of Jim Curtin. And I think that, he is good at kind of figuring out, here's what I want to do, here are the players that I have, here's how I make it work. The players that I have are going to be coming from my CSO and my sporting director, right? So you want to be in conversation with them, right? Like, remember when we were talking about some transfer windows and it was clear that like coaches wanted different things than GMs or whatever, right? Like, these things do matter. And I think that having a good tandem would probably do wonders for this project. And I understand that's going to make him, you know, maybe hold out even longer for that right option, like you said, the Berhalter scenario. But I think that there are going to be other teams with openings this winter that maybe would make more sense for Jim Curtin.
Well, for Charlotte, a new head coach was the difference maker, as we've seen last season and this season. We're going to talk about them in just a second. First, a quick break. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show, everybody. It's time to welcome our new Charlotte overlords. I'm so glad Ryan Bailey is not here for this episode. Joe, Charlotte tying the Seattle Sounders consecutive win record in the post-shootout era, says Google. 9 wins. This past weekend, a 3-0 win over Inter Miami, with Messi missing a penalty, quite famously. That seemed to be the number one highlight, the number one thing doing the rounds on social media. Not the goal that was scored not long after, not the overall win. And I think we should spend some time praising Charlotte for that win and for that streak.
Yeah, a goal scored by none other than Torkin T. So, I mean, that's just what you love to see right there. I'm piloting it. Like, we're going to see how we feel about it.
I'm into it.
Yeah, this streak for Charlotte has been really impressive. And we talked about it a little bit on the bonus show we did last week, sort of previewing the weekend, where Charlotte, coming into this game, they'd won 7 straight in the regular season. They were trying to tie Seattle's records. They'd won 8 straight heading into this game. They were trying to tie Seattle's record. They did that from 2018, Seattle Sounders. And now up against NYCFC next weekend, they have the chance to break that streak and make it their own, right? Really impressive stuff from Charlotte. The thing that has been so fascinating about them this year is that they have been unremarkable in so many ways. Like, you go through and you look at their numbers at a glance, and they are barely a positive team in terms of expected goal differential. You go through it and look at them actually playing on the field, and it's a boilerplate 4-2-3-1 where they don't really control games with the ball. They're not pressing high up the field. They don't really seem to care about field position. They don't care about they don't do almost any of the things that almost every good soccer team on the planet does in MLS and other leagues. So how are they doing this? Like, how have they somehow become a semi-real shield threat at this stage, stacking points on points on points? Well, I want to go back to that Miami game. And I think a key thing from that game is not just Messi missing his penalty. It's that Christian Kalina saved his penalty. Christian Kalina has been excellent. I went through and looked at the numbers, and I watched a bunch of this tape as well. You could see it in the game against Miami. Kalina has saved more goals than expected in 8 of the 9 games that make up this Charlotte FC win streak. He had some dips in his own form, reigning goalkeeper of the year back in the spring, sort of April-May timeframe, and Charlotte were not thriving in that window. And now Kalina has been back to his best, and maybe part of that is Charlotte trading for Drake Callender, who sure seems like his heir apparent, right? I would light a little bit of a fire under me, but Kalina has been awesome. And I don't think Charlotte win this game without Christian Kalina making that save. Like, Miami get that goal. Miami had some chances in this game. They played some decent ball. You're not at least getting the same result if Christian Kalina doesn't go and make that huge save. He has been the platform, saving goal after goal after goal this season. I think he's top 5 in MLS in goals saved above expected. He has been the platform for Idan Toklamati. Wasn't going to go back on the nickname there. He's been the platform for Toklamati to go and have so much success, have the success that he's had. Pep Biel as well, now back in this team. He comes back from injury and makes his return in the second half of this game. Suddenly you add a goalkeeper of the year candidate, someone who could legitimately win that award again, though I think if the season ended today, my vote would go to Dane St. Clair. But you have a top goalkeeper. You have an MVP candidate who was an MVP candidate, no longer, in Pep Biel because he's missed so much of the important part of the season. And then you have Toklamati, who looks like a straight-up upgrade on Pat Ajiman. Like, he looks like one of the best 8 strikers in Major League Soccer. I think he's in the 80th percentile in non-penalty expected goals per 90 minutes. He's finding all the right spots. He has been the player who can provide the finishing touch that they need. And, oh, by the way, Wilfred Zaha turned up in this game and played some delightful passes over from that left wing, cutting in on his right foot. And suddenly you have a team that, looks a little unremarkable when you spot the big macro kind of underlying numbers, and they don't play super flashy soccer, but you have a great goalkeeper and all those other pieces I mentioned, and suddenly, to me, they start looking like a trophy threat. Maybe not a trophy favorite. I would not put them in that category, but a team that has clearly been good enough to win a lot of games in this stretch of the season, and a team that, if all those ingredients are firing, there is no reason that they cannot make a playoff run, even in a very, very competitive Eastern Conference.
Jeff, I'm not surprised that Joe wants to shout out Kalina and his strong statistical record. I'm also not surprised that he has overlooked the key to everything Charlotte does.
Say
the
Tim
key
Ream.
figure.
I dare you.
It's Tim Ream. Let's talk about Tim Ream's passing, shall we? How critical has Tim Ream been to this run? You could say very or the most. The choice is yours.
I would say very.
Okay.
And this is where it's like a lot of MLS teams don't invest in their defense to an extent even of just bringing in a Tim Ream type, right? And this is also coming right after, Cincinnati has locked down Miles Robinson to be the highest paid center back in MLS moving forward. So I think that certain teams are changing that, but I think with Tim Ream, it's the range of passing. It's also just kind of the veteran savvy. Like, this is where it's one thing to look and just say he is older than, so therefore, like, should we be looking for younger options? I know everyone, when you think transfer market, it's like, why would you get a guy over, what is it, like the Arsene Wenger plague of 28 or whatever, where it's like, once you're 28, why would you bring you in? The thing is, like, Tim Ream has that sort of composure that a young franchise really needs, where none of these players on this squad have had, very few, if any, have had like that sort of success in Major League Soccer to like even understand how to navigate a playoff structure of the American landscape. He is also the 10th most accurate long passing defender in Major League Soccer, and half of the players above him play for the Vancouver Whitecaps. So a lot of that is like, system based, but like he is very good at breaking lines. He's very necessary. He's become like a vital kind of intercepting figure, really good in the air. He's had a really good, like, if he's on the best 11, this isn't like a Jordi Alba thing where it's just voters have heard of him, right? Like, Tim Ream has been, one of the most important defenders to his team of anyone this year, and he's doing it to keep himself in the race for the World Cup, which I think is also a really good side motivator. And I think it's worked really, really well for them in all phases.
All right, so it's Tim Ream, then Kalina in terms of importance for Charlotte.
And then Pep Biel, yeah.
Joe, if you are putting Turkinty himself on that list, where would he be in terms of importance to this run?
Yeah, he's been huge for them. I would picture him in that top three key players that I mentioned of Kalina, Biel, and Tokolamadi. He has not just helped Charlotte not miss a beat. He has been better than Ajiman, straight up. Like, he has been so good for this team, and he is part of. I think, to zoom out a little bit, he's part of a trend in MLS recently where if you can find a striker who doesn't take up a huge chunk of your cap hit, and Tokolamadi's a U22, so his cap hit is very small. If you can go out there and find a player like that, what an asset that is. Like, I know that's an obvious thing to say, but it's not just that it's an obvious asset, it's also that there are an increasing number of those players around Major League Soccer right now, where I think about Alonso Martinez is not a U22 and his cap hit is not so small, but at NYCFC, they converted him from a mediocre winger to being a really, really good striker. Tani Oluwaseyi just made Minnesota United like $5 million after his salary and whatever other costs they paid. They sold him for $7 million. You go through it and look at this list. San Diego, what they did with Milan Alaski earlier this season. Now Philadelphia have added him to their stockpile of players that absolutely fit this bill. If your system or your key players can create chances for your nine, and you have a player who moves well off the ball, is not a liability in hold-up play and borders on a strength in that part of the game, is quick in reading the game and is an asset defensively, man, if I was building an MLS team, I would be taking a long look at how can I surround my cheap nine with high-quality playmakers, even if that means I have to pay my playmakers a lot, and I don't have money left for the nine. I don't think you need that. If you can find a Cucho, great, go do that. Spend a lot of money on your nine. Completely fine. But if you can find a Tokolamadi and you can find a BL, I think there's increasing pile of evidence that says that is a really, really great way to build your roster.
Yeah, it's like I think a lot of it in MLS as well is you have the designated player rule, and so you're constantly fighting what is going to be the best return on investment. But like the striker who comes in as a designated player wants the ball at their feet, and they're going to want it at their feet more than just in the final third and in the box, right? Like they're going to want to be on the ball doing Zlatan sort of things all around the field where they can. The players that you mentioned, they're very good off-ball movers, and I think a part of that is also it's an asset that they're more comfortable leaning into because like other players need the ball, or like it's just like one of those things that like MLS's construction kind of educates how its game should be played, and I think teams are finding that out more and more. And I couldn't agree with you more. Like I think having that sort of nimble, clever striker who's going to be opportunistic that then frees up you to use your designated player spots for more on-ball operators, whether it's midfielders or wingers or whatever. I think it is the trend, and I think that we'll see a lot more of that moving forward. I really do.
With the way they've constructed this roster, like, how much of it is built on finding value and new ways of finding value, like you're talking about with Toklamati, versus sort of cast-offs that Dean Smith can make work? I ask simply because, like, initially I was thinking of, like, teams that have had streaks but then maybe not been able to, like, win the title in the end, and do we consider them successful? And I think about the Oakland Athletics. That is probably the example of that, where they set the win streak. They don't end up winning the championship, but you have that kind of, like, Moneyball idea of this team and how they kind of come together, a bunch of disparate parts that end up working really well. And I think there is some parallel there, not just because of the streak. Wilfred Zaha, David Justice, I feel like there's a parallel there. But yeah, like, do you see logic? Is there a consistent logic and framework in the way they built this team, or is it a bit more, that could work, let's see what happens?
No, I think few things in MLS has surprised me more than Zoran Krneta's redemption arc, right? This is the guy who when he signed Kamil Jozwiak, he's like, he did it in Spain and Holland, he can do it in Salt Lake, and it just turned out that Jozwiak was not good at soccer. There were a lot of very questionable decisions made by Charlotte FC and Krneta overseeing the sporting side of the club. They churned through coach right off the bat, and player miss after player miss. DP track record was terrible. And Krneta, to his credit, and to the credit of all the other fine people working around him in Charlotte, they have, I think, built a really savvy roster. And more than that, they built a savvy process where it is a blend of, hey, we've got Dean Smith, who is a pretty famous soccer guy, and he has all these connections to players like Wilfred Zaha and to other players in the Premier League, and they've tapped into that sort of stuff. You go through and look, there's a trio of Englishmen on the roster. You got Zaha. I mean, there's a bunch of those guys, right, that very clearly, or I could speculate, have some ties to Dean Smith and to players that he knows and to doors that opens. I would absolutely take advantage of that if I'm Charlotte FC. That's going to get you in places that you'd have a harder time getting. Why not make it a little easier for yourself? At the same time, they're clearly not just old Dino knows this guy, let's go get him in, and that's going to be our whole roster, right? I mean, I don't imagine that the fact that Charlotte FC have regularly signed players from Israel and from Israel internationals is like a Dean Smith thing. Maybe it is. I would be a bit surprised by that, right? They have tapped into different markets and different pathways. Good. I'm glad we're aligned. To build what I think is a pretty well-rounded roster. Do I think it's a perfect roster? No. The East is really good, and I still don't think they're one of the absolute best teams in the East. But when I look at them this year, and I look at the flexibility they've given themselves for next year, in terms of the top of their squad, I really like a lot of this build, and I think there's a lot of logic to it.
So, if they set the win record, if they get the win this weekend, is it a successful season, or do you have to make a playoff run for it to be a success?
I think top 4 in the East is going to be the successful season. I think the winning streak will help them get there. I also think that they're going to want to make a run, like everyone does, right? That'd be nice to make a run, but like at the same point,
might quibble with that, but sure.
Well, I think after what we've heard since we started recording, they might be even further out now. Unfortunately, we'll talk about that in segment 3. But I think with Charlotte, they still only have 2 draws this year, and that's where you get into the playoffs, where like this either is going to work incredibly well for them. They'll be the toughest team to beat in the bracket in the Eastern side, or they're going to be a first round exit, because they're getting. It suggests that they're willing to gamble. And that works really well in Major League Soccer, because it's a league where your first tiebreaker is wins, not goal difference. So you do want to go for it. But if it's not working, sometimes they do struggle to regain that foothold. And so I think for not opportunistic, but for teams that are more proactive against them, I think that they can make it more uncomfortable. What I will say, though, is Twerk and T has been a much better fit at striker, and so there is just more balance, because it wasn't just Ajimeng in front of goal, which is, I know what like U.S. men's national team fans understandably are like watching with every striker coming into the World Cup. It was that he wanted to get on the ball sooner, and he wanted to dribble with it, kind of that like archetypal like star striker sort of mold, and that's fine. But when you had Zaha and BL, it really cluttered their progression. They look like they're moving a little more freely right now. I think that they'll be a very difficult out at the minimum. I think having this record would be a nice sort of signal that, hey, we weren't winning trophies in the middle of the season. We weren't competitive at the Club World Cup. Obviously, we weren't competing in the Club World Cup, but like the Open Cup and these other tournaments. But we had the winning streak, so you have to take us seriously. And I think this has made us look at Charlotte and take them with more seriousness as contenders than they have at any point since they've debuted.
All right, there we have it. Well done, Charlotte. Long may the streak continue. Ryan Bailey will be very happy if it does. We'll take one more break. We'll come back and talk about a few other teams around the league, including a few who are out of playoff contention. Back soon. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show. We've had a scheduling change. We were going to talk teams that are out of the playoffs and what comes next for them, what next season looks like for them. But I feel like we're going to get more of those in the very near future. Maybe that can be a show unto itself. For now, though, Jeff, we have had some DC United news, and it feels like very fitting DC United news for this season. Have at it.
Yes, we have learned that Ali Mackay will not be back next year. He is gone. He joined, ahead of the 2024 season? I think that, look, it's one of those where DC has been incredibly underperforming. And you look at the squad and you would say it has some of the least concentration of talent of any squad, just in terms of, like, these are players who are going to help you win playoff series, right? Which I think now is kind of the benchmark. It's not qualified for the playoffs. Maybe never was, but it's definitely advance from the first round of the playoffs. I don't think DC had those guys. I think I kind of want to take a little bit more time to think about this, but I'm also just inclined to say how much was he set up to succeed with budget. I do, like, we talked about it earlier, where it's like, you don't need money to win. You don't need to be spending $10 million transfer fees on multiple players on your roster to win MLS Cup. But at the same point, DC feels so far adrift where, yes, we do lump them in with Montreal as kind of the model, like, goofus to the gallants of, better operating organizations. And no one wants to be a goofus. So, maybe it's better to be out of there. But, I think DC now, the rebuild, unfortunately, that clock probably extends. Maybe it's only 6 months, maybe it's 1 year, but I think it does reset a little bit just purely on needing to do the hiring process all over.
Do we think their ownership, definitely knew that Ali Mackay worked there?
When they realized that he was drawing a salary, I think they figured that out real quick. Yeah.
When reached for comment on the firing, they said, who?
It does. I mean, I will say this news comes on the 16th, which is, I think, generally for paid twice a month schedules. Like, the 1st and the 16th is a common one. You might be onto something there.
That would not surprise me. I have not been surprised by Thomas Muller's hitting the ground running and being a bolt of lightning for Vancouver, who scored a touchdown this weekend, Joe. Not a bad weekend for Muller and co. I believe it was his birthday. I believe he also got a happy birthday serenade, which made me strangely happy, and I don't know why.
Yeah, Vancouver, man, they didn't play with their food against Philly, right? This was a pre-rotated Philly team for the U.S. Open Cup semifinals.
See what happens when you get rid of Jim Curtin, Philly? You see what happens? You're not top of the East. Oh, wait, you are. Never mind.
Philly, not at full strength. They were probably slightly less at full strength than Vancouver, but Vancouver also weren't at full strength. No Brian White, who's out dealing with a hamstring injury. Ryan Gauld has only just now been cleared to train with full contact. That's been news coming out of Vancouver recently, so there's some positive stuff there. Their new center backs that they signed in the summer window are both injured. Great stuff. So Vancouver, not at their best. Philly, again, less at their best. But Vancouver, they found the weak point in Philly, which was Ali Bedoya playing as a right back, which you've seen before this year, but you can't do it. You can't do it anymore. Ali Ahmed just stole his lunch money over and over again. I think it was the second goal that he creates and the fourth goal as well. He dusted Bedoya to the point where Bedoya and two other teammates got subbed off before halftime of this game. So, yeah, a lot of issues in this one for Philly. I'm not really worried about them. This was, I think, a weird one-off game, and these kinds of broad score lines don't tend to be super repeatable. We don't see this in soccer, right? We don't see 7-0 wins in soccer. So I'm not really worried about Philly. What this does for Vancouver, though, is it really did, along with San Diego's loss to Minnesota, push them back into the thick of the Shield race, where they're now third in MLS in points per game. They're just behind San Diego, and they're just behind Philly. And they've got games in hand. So there is an element where Vancouver still kind of sort of control their own destiny here in a way that no other team in MLS really does. They're also still in Canadian Championship contention, and they're in MLS Cup contention, of course. So 3 trophies still on offer for them after they make their run all the way to the CCC final. That they have been this good after playing as many games as they have this year, it is extremely impressive. They were excellent over the weekend, and I've got real expectations for this team. Like, if they can get Gauld back as sort of the Stuart Armstrong of 2025, where Armstrong came in late, he was the last DP to join MLS last year, and he made them real scary for LAFC in the playoffs. Like, there's another world, maybe 4 out of 10 worlds last year where Vancouver beat LAFC in the first round of the playoffs.
I'd agree.
And Vandy Sartini still has a job. So there's a lot of different stuff that could have gone down here, but I've got a ton of Vancouver stock, even after that blip they had over the summer, over the real early part of the summer. I watch this team. I am regularly impressed by them. I think they're doing a lot of good stuff, and I think their squad's about to get even better now that they're back in the Shield race. Everything seems to be kind of aligning for Vancouver.
Yeah, I think I have more confidence in them reaching MLS Cup from the West than San Diego. And just after this weekend, and just generally, I think this is when we talked about the Mueller signing. I think I'd said something along these lines, but this is where having him come in mid-season to be the pick up loose change goals and chances and just kind of give the defense another thing to think about really does help for such a well-drilled team that had kind of a mid-season hiccup with that CCC final. And then also kind of working out from the rubble of it, and they were already in a bit of a dip in the form after the semifinal, all these sorts of things. It just changes, gives the defenses something they have to be so stressed about that Brian White is finding more space to operate within, and the wingers are finding more terrain on the wings, and Seb Berhalter maybe has another great option for line breaking and these sorts of things. So I think it's working really naturally. I agree with Joe. I'm not more worried about Philadelphia after this than I was before this game. What I will say though is I think that this is kind of what I've spoken to throughout the season about the limits of energy drink soccer, and talent mismatch is probably more at fault for this one. I do agree, but at the same point, it's hard to regain a foothold in a game if your system is not predicated on knowing what to do when you do have the ball, and instead trying to force teams to make mistakes when they do. And what that usually means is when Philly is behind, they struggle to regain points because they don't have the ball in meaningful areas. They have the second fewest box touches per 90 minutes spent trailing of any team in Major League Soccer. So it's just they have to be that much more clinical, and obviously they would have had to make 8 of those 10 box touches turn into goals. And that's just not going to happen on a day like this.
So Vancouver went and kicked themselves a touchdown. Congratulations to them. Joe, you ready for it? You ready for it? We had a game of two halves in Columbus and Atlanta, didn't we now? Columbus up 5-0 at the half, and then it finishes 5-4. I am confused.
I'm not. I'm confused too. I'm not really against the old cliche of game of two halves.
This was literally it was.
This is
very much.
This should, if anything, this should force coaches to think twice. Was it this game? No. Okay, it was not a game of two halves. Okay.
Incredible point, Jeff. Could not agree with that anymore. Yeah, this was Columbus scoring 5 goals in the first half, and then Atlanta scoring 4 goals in the second.
I blame Graham Ruthven, by the way, who believe messaged the Slack at halftime. Yes. Is this going to finish 10-0 to Columbus? No, is the answer.
Graham, you ruined it for all of us. I hope you're happy. If that had happened, we could have seen MLS break its own record for most goals scored on a single match day. Instead, it was only equaled August 2022 to then Saturday. So in 2028, at some point, we're going to have another banger of a match day every 3 years, I think is the cycle we're on.
Like a comet. That's great.
Yeah, right? This is both a good result for Columbus because they have been dropping lower and lower down the Eastern Conference standings, but also a brutal one because they lost Diego Rossi, which I think is the big story of this game. Beating Atlanta, it's not really a story at this stage of the year. Losing Rossi along the way hurts because we were so close to getting Columbus at their best. Where Darlington Nagbe's finally back in the 11 for this game. Wissam Abu Ali scores his first goal for the Crew in this game. Rossi gets a hat trick. All of a sudden things are firing. And then Rossi has to come off before halftime. And it sounds like he could miss a month, which takes him right up to the end of the regular season. The injury gods are not really in the Crew's favor right now, where it's not just Rossi they're missing. They're also missing Mo Farsi, a right wing back, although I think Carrera's been fine in that spot. And they're also missing Sean Zawadzki after he got injured in USMNT camp. So,
not Sean.
Yeah, not Sean. That reaction is appropriate with the U.S., Taylor. For the Crew, it's actually a big loss. So this is a really tough spot for Columbus, where I think when they're healthy, I still back them to be in that top tier of MLS teams. I think they're still absolutely in that group. If you're missing your best attacking player in Diego Rossi, I start to worry a little bit. So I'm not panicked about the Crew. I think this team can turn it on in the playoffs, but it is unfortunate how things have gone between taking so long to get Wissam Abu Ali in market, getting him on the field, that timing with Nagbe's injury, and now Rossi coming out. It's like we can't see the full picture for Columbus. We can just kind of see a blurry one right now.
All right. Jeff, how much do you want to spend on your customary Minnesota section?
as the person who stays up to watch Western Conference games, especially in California. Yeah, I think it was the other kind of marquee matchup of the weekend between Vancouver and Philly. I think was the other one that looked like two top of table teams from that one is maybe interesting because it looks like an MLS Cup preview. This one looks like a conference semifinal or whatever. But I think this is where the big story to me, and this is distilling it so simply. It has nothing to do with the whole one team likes to defend, one team likes to have the ball. It's much more about goalkeepers and strikers and the yeah, you do kind of need those guys to be good, don't you? Right? Like you can find good strikers for cheap. You can find a Danny Masovsky as well. You could just keep Milan Olaski. What a weird idea that would have been for this team. But like you look and San Diego had like. In their 6 games, some of this is game state dictated, but in the 6 games where they've generated the most chances, San Diego has only won 1 of them and has lost 3 of them. And this was one of those. There was the second most chances that they've generated. It's 20. Again, some of that is just when you're trailing, you're going to be more desperate to shoot, so more things are going to register as chances created. But these were genuine, like, clear scoring chances. They had 6 big chances. Dane St. Clair had a huge game as well, and on the other end, CJ Dos Santos got chipped from midfield. And Dos Santos had some other issues as well, some of them in possession, some hiccups, but I think more so just shot stopping was suspect. Minnesota, like pretty much every opportunity that they actually took that was a good look would be on target and either generate a corner kick, which they love, or a goal. But yeah, it just looks like a case Minnesota just kind of pestered them. Dane St. Clair did his thing. I agree, goalkeeper of the year candidate, and then frustrated San Diego long enough. They got the goal. San Diego wasn't able to pounce. They scored again, and then they just were having fun with it and chipped from midfield. So good win for Minnesota. Another one that just kind of reiterates that they should be able to contend as far in the playoffs, if not further, than they did last year at the conference semifinals, losing to the Galaxy. And for San Diego, they're still going to have some volatility because of the issues at striker, but especially at goalkeeper, compared to other contenders.
And in terms of rounding up the Supporter Shield race conversation, Joe, should we spend a second with Cincinnati?
Yeah, sure. This was Cincinnati in their 2-1 win over Nashville at their kind of Jekyll and Hyde-iest, where they've been a Jekyll and Hyde team this whole year, right? Where sometimes you watch them and it's like, wow, there's so much talent here. They can beat anybody in this league. They're absolutely a trophy contender. And then other times you watch them make ridiculous defensive errors, which they did in this game, by the way, on Nashville's goal. Or you watch them just not be able to build out from the back like they couldn't do at all against Philly. And you think, how is this team really in the Supporter Shield race? This was a game where we saw both of those things. I mentioned some of the defensive errors. They also put together some just delightful attacking sequences in this game. Evander scores the game winner late in stoppage time. But even before that, it's his assist for Brenner's goal that is just stupid good. And it's that assist, it's a lovely through ball to Brenner. It's that assist that puts Evander as, I think, the 7th player in MLS history to record 15 and 10 in back-to-back seasons. The dude's been a star, and that's not a question. Talent is not a question for Cincinnati. It's can this group actually function together on a consistent basis, a consistent enough basis, to either end up pipping a couple teams to the Shield, which is not off the table, or to an actual MLS Cup, which is what they've been waiting for because they've already done the whole Shield thing. It's a huge question, and that Matt Miazga leaves this game, I believe, in the 80th minute with an injury. We don't have an update on that yet. Is a major concern. So I really don't know how to make heads or tails of Cincinnati right now. I just know that I like to watch them because I have no clue what I'm going to get.
Well, that's, I guess, a good note to end on. We love the predictability of some results, but we love the chaos of Major League Soccer ultimately. And I appreciate going through that chaos with you two fine fellows here on our Tuesday episode. Joe Lowry, it's been lovely, as always, my New England Revjolution friend.
Hey, thanks, Taylor.
And Jeff Twerkin T. Reuter, lovely to chat with you as well, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Same time next week.
Yes, sir. Listeners, until then, but also before then, because we'll talk to you tomorrow, we greatly appreciate you all listening, as ever, and we will talk to you very soon.